On my left, your right, are the members of the committee, and on my right are the council officers assisting the committee. We'll begin with an acknowledgement of country. Gala Cottage Wujuk Mort, Kn Kadak Nija Walilap Buja, where Jinang Wajuk Kadichin, where Nyang Bula Yeye. We acknowledge that the Wajuk people, as the traditional owners of the Greater Fremantle Wallup area, and we recognise that their cultural and heritage beliefs are still important today. Attendance, apologies and leaves of absence. We have an apology from the Mayor and from Councillor Lorver, being replaced by Councillor Moughlin. Any other apologies? No. Disclosures of interest by members. There are none. Responses to questions taken on notice. There are none. Public question time is an opportunity for people to ask questions about items that are not on tonight's agenda, items of a general nature or questions. Is there anybody here in that category? Items not on the agenda. Okay. Petitions, deputations, presentations, confirmation of minutes. I move the minutes of the Planning Committee 7th of September 2022. Is there a seconder? Councillor Graham, thank you. All those in favour? That's unanimous, thank you. Any elected member communications? So we move on to the items for tonight. Members of the public wishing to speak, you have 3 minutes to speak. You'll hear an alarm about 20 seconds before and ask you to wind up at that point. The committee may ask questions of you after the 3 minutes, or they may not. We just ask you to keep your minutes to 3 minutes. The meeting is recorded and it's also being broadcast live on the internet. So the first item is 59 Swanbourne Street, a 2-storey addition to a cottage. It's recommended for conditional approval. I have 2 people wishing to speak against and 1 person in favour, so we'll take the people against first. We've got Susan and Pierre, who'd like to go first. Susan Green. Yep. If you could just pull the microphone down so that it's pointing straight at your mouth. Thanks. Oops, sorry, maybe not.
Wait a minute, is there a...
Can you tighten it up?
Something that...
Just needs tightening up, just a second.
Yeah. This is not going well.
We won't start the clock. I think that one is generally better anyway, if we could use that one. And that will show up as Councillor Law to anybody else on the committee. Thank you. We'll start your time now, thanks.
Start now?
Yep.
Hello, I'm Susan Green and I reside with my husband Jeremy at 29 Stephen Street, Fremantle. Our main concerns with this proposed development are the roof deck and the planter. Bear in mind that the roof deck spans almost the full length of our back garden and the recreational area outdoors, north to south. The applicant's agreement to raise the height of the privacy wall to 1.6 metres resolves the overlooking of our property from floor level of the roof deck. But there is the issue of the planter though. Given the 1.6 metre high privacy wall, it's likely that people wanting to see the sunset or a view of the ocean can conveniently step up onto the eastern wall of the planter and from there see most of our back garden, even if inadvertently. I'm told that the planning laws prohibit the planter being changed to any other purpose than garden, but that's not to say it wouldn't happen. A future buyer may not realise that it must remain a garden and transform it into a platform or a bench. The solution that we propose to minimise the overview of our garden from the planter height is to fix a 70 centimetre wide ledge to the top of the privacy wall, running along the full length of it and projecting westward. That westward. It's not complete protection, but it would extend the area being shielded. And a privacy ledge has the added advantage of zero impact on the view from roof deck to the west. It's clear that this development is designed for a large, youngish family. 5 bedrooms, games room, and a big family room all suggest that. The roof deck and the adjacent family room and kitchen are destined to be the hub of the household. This is significant in view of the applicant's justification for not meeting the deemed to comply requirements of the R codes. The roof deck is in fact being used to try to make up the shortfall for the development's open space. It's argued in the Planning Committee's agenda for this meeting that the roof deck, and I quote, located on the southwestern side of the dwelling will ensure suitable, usable outdoor space being available to residents of the dwellings, unquote. I'm puzzled as to the wisdom of making such a concession in this case on the open space. It's evident, however, that the deck is envisaged as a primary outdoor living space for a large family, with all the activity that entails. And with this in mind, we request the Planning Committee to require that the 1.6 metre privacy wall be built of a solid, opaque material like the 1.2 metre high wall shown in the original plan, and similarly, the proposed ledge be of a suitable non-transparent screen. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee? Councillor Groom.
I've just got a question for you. There are, I guess, we're a bit constrained with conditions we can apply that sit outside of the R codes. And I'm wondering whether the issue is fixed if the planter box isn't there. I'm wondering whether the issue is fixed if the planter box is not there.
That would certainly change things, I think. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I guess, yeah, I wonder whether people would then, whether they then bring a bench up. I'm to just look out over. It's really hard to judge that one. But yeah, it could be better not to have the front box there at all.
Okay.
It would bring people who want to look out closer to our boundary, and that's probably the argument against it.
Thank you.
Any further questions from the committee?
That's correct. Thank you for the opportunity to address the Planning Committee. My name is Pierre Horwitz. I'm a Professor of Environmental Science and I live at 61 Swanbourne Street. I speak also on behalf of my partner, Dr. Pam Nichols, who lives at this address too. We would like to speak against the recommendation for the conditional approval and argue here that while the conditions imposed are warranted, the approval should not be granted due to the proposed contravention of the open space requirement. It's our view that the open space should be maintained at the deemed to comply level of 45%, and we form this view based on the absence of any reasonable need to go beyond it. There is, in our opinion, nothing about the site, nothing intrinsic about the block that warrants a contravention of this deemed to comply level. In fact, the reverse is the case. The block at 59 Swanbourne is very similar in size to the 3 other neighbouring blocks to the west on Stephen Street, all of which appear to have substantially achieved open space compliance. To its south, at least 5 successive properties appear to have achieved compliance as well. In this respect, we regard the officer's comment on the matter regarding an eclectic mix is in error. This development will be the odd one out. The impact of contravening the 45% open space level is significant. The extra bulk increases by that amount. The building becomes more so out of character with the immediate neighbourhood, the housing on Stephen Street and Swanbourne Street. We note that the open space is not just required for the residents, it's required for the immediate neighbourhood as well, and we see the loss of open space as serious in this regard. It contributes to a greater thermal mass as a planning and in a planning era when we should be seeking to decrease urban heat island effects. The officers comment that the loss of open space is somehow compensated for by the upstairs balcony is, in our view, in error as well on two grounds. It is part of the thermal mass of the building, and secondly, it impacts more upon the visual and other amenities of neighbouring properties, much more so than open space would do. We humbly request your reconsideration of these matters and the conditional approval.
Thank you. Any questions of the neighbour? Thank you. Mike Beer, you're the applicant.
Yes. Thanks for the opportunity to speak. I've been backwards and forwards with planning a few times to try and resolve the issues. We had a couple of other issues that we've resolved. The open space area is 26 square metres over the amount that is allowable at 45%. If you take into account the roof deck, we're well over the open space. The R codes are interesting as they say that if your roof deck does count it as open space, as long as you don't have another area of the building where I have the front porch is above 500 mil. If you take the front porch off, we're still under the open space area, right? I've worked pretty hard to make sure that this goes through as easily as possible. I'm a builder by trade. I don't want to upset the neighbours, but at the end of the day, a lot of the developments in our local area do not have the required open space. So I'd like the council's consideration to go forward with the project. Thank you.
Any questions of the applicant? Councillor Lang.
Thank you. The request from the neighbour on Stephen Street regards to the ledge, the 70 or 700 mil ledge. Would you have any opposition to installing or adding that to your build?
Yeah, look, it just doesn't go with the build, right? And it really doesn't serve a purpose. I've provided drawings showing the view over the ledge at 1.6, and you're several metres above the neighbour's, being able to look in the neighbour's yard, right? So I think, you know, with regards to the planter box, yes, you could stand on the planter box and look over the top of the wall, but you could stand on the roof and look into the neighbour's backyard, right? I can't control what happens there, you know. We can take out, I'm happy to take out the planter box. I actually put that there to make a bigger separation so that it's a longer view over the top, right? You know, so I've really tried hard to make sure that we're not impacting the neighbours, and I don't believe that we are. Okay.
Any further questions of the applicant?
Thank you.
So we'll go into committee. Any questions before I move the motion? Any questions of the officers?
Just this open space requirement. I mean, it's becoming a bit of a problem, not just with this one, but decks and viewing platforms, and they're springing up everywhere, and they just seem to be, you know, a new flavour of the month. I mean, is that right, that is allowed to be open space and that satisfies all these requirements? I thought open space was yard and, you know, grass and pathways, and not now bloody huge viewing decks and, you know. Anyway, you understand that? Can you answer it?
Through the chair, the R code definition of open space is, you've pretty much hit the nail on the head, Councillor Graham. It's not ideal. It does include things like open roof decks, but then excludes covered verandas. So it's open space. It's not deep soil planting or garden space. It's not a great portion of the codes, and hopefully in things like the medium density codes that would be tightened up. But yeah, the current calculation is that they don't comply because of things like the veranda, which is covered. But if the veranda weren't to be covered, it could potentially be included in open space. So I've probably made that more confusing than it needs to be, but it probably responds to your point.
I'll move the officer's recommendation, which is for approval with conditions. Is there a seconder? Councillor Groom. Any discussion? I do have a foreshadowed amendment about the planter boxes being required to be retained, but I will hear contributions from the committee first. Councillor Grimm.
Sorry, Councillor Sullivan. Yeah, this is again one I struggle, and Councillor Graham, you know, to your point that we are getting this proliferation of roof decks, and whilst I accept that the proponent on this one has done everything they can and are required to do to address privacy, they do have a series of impacts in terms of, you know, where the noise is coming from and so forth. But the other thing for me about this property is that there's no decrease on the current open space at the ground plan. So the development sits entirely on existing development. There's no incursion into existing green space, and I guess that's what's kind of got me across the line and looking at on balance. It's not really a net loss, except that it's a net loss up in the air, and it is a really large house, which I guess I've struggled with. But when I look at it with the R codes and the kind of reasonable effort that's been made, I can't see grounds to not approve it. I understand there is a motion about keeping the planter box. I don't know that that achieves the outcome, because the question is about having an element on the deck that people could readily stand on to capture the view, and whether that's the edge of a planter deck or whether it is a bench or something. That's kind of human nature and a trick. I guess my upside on that is if you're standing up to look at the view, then you're looking at the view and not kind of having a perv on the neighbours. You would have to hope. But yeah, I can see why people are not happy with this development, and I fully understand that. In terms of its compliance and its impacts, I think it has done everything reasonable to manage those. So it's kind of a almost reluctant approval from me.
Councillor Sullivan, did you want to speak?
Thank you. I also have really struggled with this proposal. And as you know, I mean, the beginning of my struggle is actually that the cottage that sits on the site somehow has escaped being on our heritage list. That the area is not part of one of our heritage listed areas as well, meaning that there was no assessment of the heritage value of this cottage. And I accept that a lot of people would look at it as it currently is and go, well, it's been modified reasonably, similarly, in fact, to virtually every other cottage in Fremantle over the years. It presents at the moment in a way that is, not much. There hasn't been a lot of love towards its original characteristics, but it's also a relatively intact and perfectly reasonable example of a period cottage from around the early 1900s, maybe even slightly later, and one that in many other sites on Fremantle have been successfully renovated and have made their owners better off financially, ultimately. Because a heritage cottage, every real estate agent will tell you, is going to provide you with a better value. The bizarre thing for me is this cottage is right in the very back corner, and in that sense provides almost no negative impact in terms of keeping it. In fact, it provides a positive impact, and it is being kept, but it's not being kept for conservation value. It's being kept as if it's just bricks and mortar and converted in a way that gets swallowed up by the much bigger building. Let me emphasise a few things. I don't have a problem at all with a big house. Families need big houses. Don't have a problem with that. They have purchased a big block, or they own a big block, I should say, and they should be entitled to build a big house. Don't have a problem with that. They've got a great family capable site, you know, fantastic park over the road, etc., etc. So why not? But it's also, as I said, it's a big block. So many options present itself with this block. Um, it, it has changes in level, which would enable a design that utilised the land that's available and optimise that land in a way that gave the 45% open space quite easily. You know, as I understand it, the way I look at it, and perhaps the engineers were telling us they couldn't have car access off Stevens Street, that they had to come in off Swanbourne Street because of the roundabout. I don't know. But for me, I would, imagine utilising the changes in level to get all of your parking and a lot more on the Stevens Street side and have a terrace over the top of that. These are the sort of things that are perfectly reasonable, and you would imagine would have then avoided having like a massive double garage right in the middle of your house, which for me is kind of a bizarre outcome. So the other thing I struggle with is, even without the cottage being heritage listed, I would have thought that in a sense, that the right approach to it would have been to retain its characteristics and to work around those, rather than effectively doing the flying saucer. Let's just land the flying saucer on top of the existing building and build directly above it. So for all of those reasons, and in doing that, of course, that puts the very offending part of the building on the neighbours right where it's worst. It's right where it's going to have the greatest impact on the neighbours to the west and the neighbours to the south. And so when I look at things like, okay, it's only got the one thing there it's not really compliant with, and it's the open space. And then I consider I'm asked to then mitigate that by, is it still generally compliant, or in terms of a performance standard, or does it actually sort of overcome a whole bunch of other problems with amenity and the like that perhaps mitigate and add value to the overall design? I'm kind of left with the opinion that, for me, the answer to that is no on both scores. And so I really do struggle with approving this one as it is. And yeah, I mean, even with the modifications being proposed, I won't be supporting it.
Any further discussion? Councillor Lang.
I did have a quick question regarding the ledge that was proposed for the planning team, if it was possible to have that as part of the conditions.
Through the chair, it goes one step beyond what the R codes do require for screening. So if the applicant were to appeal that condition, and they've been quite clear in saying that it's not their preference for that to be imposed, it would be pretty quickly thrown out. So the condition as it stands in requiring screening up to 1.6 metres would mean it was deemed to comply, and anything further than that wouldn't be a valid planning condition.
Yeah, this is a really tough one. Andrew, as always, articulates these things far better than I ever could. Given that this tough site and the topography on Swanbourne Street coming down to Stevens Street, it's pretty difficult to design something that isn't going to be looking in your backyard. I can see that the applicant is trying to do something. I can see also that there seems to be good communication between the neighbours to try and find a suitable resolution. Could more be done? And are we splitting hairs on this discussion around planter box versus ledge? What would happen in the future if the planter box is there and something's built on top? I don't know. I'm leaning more towards what Councillor Sutton described as perhaps being unable to support this. Could more be done to try and protect the neighbours' amenity with this application?
Any further discussion? And just to point out, there is no recommendation for refusal, so we would have to refer this to council if you wanted to, or refer it back to the applicant for variation. So you might need to give that some thought if you don't want to support it. Any further discussion? Well, I'll move the amendment I have here so that it becomes part of the motion if there's support for it. But if we could get that on the screen. So the planter boxes are shown on the plans, but they're not explicitly mentioned in the conditions. So what I've asked to do is to have the planter boxes required to be retained and maintained as part of the approval. I will move that if there's a seconder, Councillor Lang. And in moving that, I'd say that to me, the 1.6 is not that high. I mean, my daughter just bought a house which has got exactly the compliant perforated screen up to 1.6, and if you go right up to it, you can see pretty much everything if you're my height. So I think the planter box, keeping people one or so meters back from the screen, is a sensible thing, and to have it conditioned as being required is a sensible modification. So that's moved and seconded. Is there any discussion on that? Okay, I'll move that to a vote. All those in favour of the amendment? That's unanimous, thank you. So that becomes part of the approval. Now, does anybody wish to move? Would be a referral to modifications? Well, if we vote on the recommendation it's lost, we can't do anything with it. If we vote on the recommendation it's lost, it will simply go to council with, unless someone now wants to refer it to council or refer it back to the applicant. So I'll just, can I take advice on that? So we're not able to refuse it tonight. We're able to not approve it, and then it would go to council. So I will just simply move the officer's recommendation for approval and see how we go. So all those in favour? All those against? So that needs to go to council anyway because we don't have 5 votes. So just for the benefit of the people in the gallery, we need 5 votes at the committee to make a decision, and we only have 4. So it goes to council with a recommendation for approval. Okay, is that clear? If you're not clear on that, you can contact the officers tomorrow. So you've got the votes recorded? Yeah. Thank you very much. Item 2 is Simper Street, an outbuilding. The outbuilding is part of an addition to the building, but the addition has been approved by delegated authority. That's why you've got quite so many plans for an outbuilding. Before moving it, the neighbours are not able to be present. They've asked for a statement to be read out, and they're from 31 Simper Street, Jeff and Louise Warren, and I've asked Mr. Kingdom if he would kindly read that out.
Thank you, Chair. Dear Kayla and Bryn, thank you for reading the statement at the planning meeting on our behalf. Our statement is as follows. We would like to address the applicant's response to our initial submission. Although the proposed shed is 0.2 of a metre further south than the previous garage, as the proposed shed is longer than the previous garage, the overall impact to our property is that it would extend 2.2 metres further north than the original outbuilding. This will result in the shed being significantly more visible from our outdoor living area and leaving only a few metres from our children's bedrooms at the rear of our house. The previous garage has a gable roof and was a metre from the fence line. Therefore, the highest point of the garage was approximately 3 metres from the fence line at the peak of the gable. This afforded us a sense of openness. Given the sloped roof design of the proposed shed and the orientation of the roof, the highest point of the proposed outbuilding would be located directly on our fence line at a height of 3.6 metres. Therefore, despite the roof being 0.6 of a metre lower than the original garage, it will be significantly higher at our fence line, blocking around 30% of the skyline. This is a significant amount and would impose a sense of confinement. If the proposed shed was set 1 metre from the eastern boundary, as the previous outbuilding was positioned, it would be directly in line with the driveway. The original outbuilding was used as a garage by the previous owners, and there were no vehicle access or safety issues in the almost 30 years we have resided next door. Therefore, positioning the shed 1 metre from the fence line would be perfectly suitable. According to the Dividing Fences Act, the boundary fence is owned by the owner of the boundary wall, and as such, if the proposed shed is built, we would lose ownership of the dividing fence. It also states that any fence higher than 1.8 metre requires written approval of the adjoining neighbours. The proposed dividing fence is 3.6 metres high. As the adjoining neighbours, we do not approve of the proposed dividing fence. Given this, if this proposal is approved, we will be forced to seek legal advice. The proposed shed, in its current form, will have a significant negative impact on our property and our quality of life. If the design were to be modified and the shed moved 1 metre west off of the fence line, as well as the roof rotated 180 degrees so that the highest point of the roof is located on the western side of the proposed outbuilding, our concerns would be addressed and we would take no issue with the proposed building. There are no valid reasons why these modifications to the design cannot be made, and by making these modifications, everyone's needs in this matter can be adequately met and no party suffering any losses. Thank you. Kind regards from Jeff and Louise.
Thank you. We'll take some questions on that particular issue later, maybe. Michael Smith, you're the applicant.
Hi, and thanks for letting me talk. Yeah, this is replacing an old garage, which is a 60-year-old asbestos rusted tin roof garage. The fence, the boundary fence now, once again, is a 60-year-old asbestos fence, which I'll be removing 10 metres of, but no expense to the neighbour. I mean, I don't know if you've seen the photo where the planning officer sort of superimposed the new garage. About 85%, more than 80% of it will be behind their existing shed. He sort of contradicted himself a bit there. It starts 2 metres back and it's 1.8 metres longer, so it's 200 millimetres further back than the other one finished in the block. Its highest point is lower. With the slope of the fence, of the roof, sorry, they won't see any roof at all. It'll just be the fence. And since we first even thought about, that garage always needed replacing. It was leaking, it was falling down basically. And since we thought of replacing, we've always thought of the neighbours, of not, I wouldn't want my neighbour building something imposing on me, so we haven't done that. So it's further back in the block. It's more behind their existing shed than the old one was. I don't really know what else to say. But we've taken all that into account. And with the new extension, as he's talking about, turning or safety or driving, if it came a metre off, it would be a metre behind our alfresco. You would have our alfresco wall and the garage coming past it. We'd have to sort of come in and bend around it. Sorry? Yeah, and on our particular street, there's a 7-metre setback at the front from your boundary. So we cannot put one out the front. The only place for it is where the old one was, which is where this one will be, impacting the neighbour even less than the old one was. So we've ever since we thought of it, we've tried to make that part of it, that we're not going to affect them in any way. As the councillor has said, it doesn't affect any of you. As I said, over 80% of it is behind their shed. Their living area out the back, the angle you will be sitting next to their pool, you will not see it at all beyond their shed. Yes, that's what I'd like to say. It is less of imposition on the neighbour than it was, and with sort of the zero wall setback, our direct western neighbour has a garage on the boundary. His direct western neighbour has a garage wall on the boundary. There won't be losing ownership of the boundary fence. I mean, everything's going to be built within our boundary. We could leave the existing asbestos fence there if they liked and still build it on our boundary, and that fence would be there. So I assumed I was doing everyone a favour by removing 10 metres of old asbestos. And in the old shed itself, there was about 45 square metres of asbestos we've removed, and rusting tin, it was nothing to look at. Whereas this one, they'll have a nice, brand new, rendered wall, all the asbestos gone, at no expense to them at all, which they will barely see. So
thank you. Any questions of the applicant? Thank you. I will just ask the officer just to clarify, maybe just to clarify those 2 points. A parapet wall can replace a dividing fence without any permission of the neighbour. That's my first question. Although the neighbours need to give permission to change the fence, they don't need to give permission for the fence to be replaced by a parapet wall, I don't believe. And the second one is the neighbour has no responsibility for the maintenance of the parapet wall, and in fact, the owner of the parapet wall has to maintain it to a good condition for forever. Can you just clarify those 2 points?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I won't profess to be an expert on the Dividing Fences Act, but it is a wall is a different matter to a fence, and I think the applicant's indicated there that he'll be taking down the fence at his expense and seeking to maintain the wall. And correct, yes, you do need to maintain the wall of your building on your lot. If there's any form of encroachment, they would need to apply, get a BA20, which is a building form, but ultimately any footings and things should be remaining on their lot anyway. So there shouldn't be anything that the adjoining neighbour needs to do or look after.
Oh, sorry. Can I just ask the officers to contact the neighbours just to explain those 2 points that they've raised in their letter? So that's carried. That's approved by delegation tonight. You can talk to the officers tomorrow about what to do next. Thank you. Sorry, no to speak on. I've got this light on here. I can't actually see it. No one to speak on item 3, so we'll look at item 4, which is a demolition. Sam Martin, do you wish to speak? You're the architect for the replacement proposal. 3 minutes, thank you, starting now.
Good evening. We're for the officer's recommendation for approval. The Heritage Officer's done a very thorough assessment and finds no adverse impact on the heritage area or the streetscape. If we demolish, and they support it, as does the city's planners. The owners have recently purchased this old cottage, and although not heritage listed, we need to do this demolition application just to find out and to know if we are actually allowed to demolish it, and to design a well-designed, thought-out, energy-efficient building from scratch. This application is simply a question: are the owners allowed to demolish it, partially or fully? And if that's the way they want to go. It's very early in the design process, but we need this important information. It seems that it would be fair to demolish, given the city's trained planners and heritage department think it's okay. The owners wish to do an exceptional building, well designed, fantastic, and in keeping with this street and its history, the Greater South 30 precinct. I grew up in this street, Walker Street, and feel very strongly about designing wonderful buildings. We will deliver a great addition, whatever we do, and bring something special to this precinct. I believe the owners are in their rights to demolish it if that's what their wishes are, and that's what the Heritage and Planning Officer's recommendation is.
Thank you. Any questions of the architect? Councillor Groom?
So is it possible that the building will be retained then?
we're just entering into the design process, and we don't actually. There's not enough information to know what we can do with it.
Yeah. Okay.
So we've had one in the past where we did get a demolition permit, and we're not demolishing it. We're demolishing and reinventing 90% of it, but I guess it gives clarity on how much free reign you have on the site, essentially.
Yep.
So it's just really early stages in the design
I
process.
understand that, but it's one of those good bones buildings, isn't it?
Sorry?
It's one of those good bones buildings, so I was interested in whether that's an option.
Well, it's just complicated to not know at the start of a design process whether how much you can demolish or not demolish or reinvent or not.
Any further questions? Councillor Sullivan?
Thanks. I was just pursuing that aspect as well. The what's described as a laneway, which is part of the, I guess, where the bike path runs up along the tip side. This property's had access across that to its rear shed, which was used quite heavily as a workshop by the previous owners. Is that a gazetted right of way, and is there a possibility that a new design would actually use Walker Street rather than continue to use that sort of public realm?
I think that street is called Hickory Lane, isn't it? I think that's more of a question for the city as to whether it's a gazetted road or not.
That's fine. I just it has always struck me as someone that's walked past it as to I wonder how they managed to get access across that when no other property along there really has access across it. So probably something to pursue and look at anyway.
Yeah, it's a great property and has huge potential.
Any further questions of the applicant? I move the officer's recommendation, which is to approve demolition. Is there a seconder? Councillor Groom. Any discussion? All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. So we're back to item 3, which is Prowse Street, single-storey new house. I'll move the officer's recommendation. Is there a seconder? Councillor Moughlin. Any discussion? Any discussion? No. Move the recommendation. All those in favour? That's carried. Councillor Sullivan, you in favour? Yep. You're very quick. That's unanimous. Thank you. Any questions on the information report?
Yes.
Councillor Graham.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. At the last meeting, you'd recall perhaps that I requested to find out how much the defence of the demolition of the 90 Brack Street site was, and we now have a figure in the report on page 40, if you haven't seen it. And I'd just like to make a few comments, if I may. Most of the committee members would know that I was strongly in favour of demolition. This council had a watertight report from the planning officer, the heritage architect, the applicant's heritage architect, who's mostly the most eminent heritage architect in WA, Phil Griffiths. There's been no community outcry over this proposal to demolish these outbuildings. We then proceeded to a briefing with Julia Skinner, the barrister, who advised that no respected heritage architects in the city were prepared to defend this. And if he wasn't so polite, he would have mostly stood up and basically said, look, stop the nonsense, pull out of this and save yourself some money. Unfortunately, this council didn't, but that was the time. There were so many red flags then. We needed some leadership to say, look, this is going to cost us a lot of money for going nowhere. And that's basically what's happened. and we ended up with some architects from the country that obviously, I don't know much about them, never heard of them, and it didn't get up. Now, look, I always accept council decisions. I'm not one to go out there and go on about them and moan and groan. But when this one cost $37,000 just of council money, when it was clear from the very first planning meeting that this was a nonsense to go down that path, and I think I said to Councillor Lang afterwards, I said, well, that's the worst decision I've been at on this council. But the point is, 37,000, that's a lot of money. And we're all screaming for money. And it's a shame Councillor Lorber's not here, because he supported the defence. Yet every council meeting he's going on about there's not enough money in Hilton, you know. And it's the poor old ratepayer that pays for these. You know, the pensioner in Hilton, the struggling young family in South Fremantle with mortgage stress now. You know, we're all contributing to this figure. So I just wanted to get that off my chest, that when we see something as black and white as something like this, why we continually want to pursue it at such expense, and we knew it was going to be expense because I asked that question to Julius Skinner, and he said, if they claim costs, you'll be looking anywhere between 60 and 100,000. Now, if that wasn't enough then to think, okay, we've got 3 heritage reports here, all saying the same thing, let's get out of this. But no, we didn't. So I'd just like to make the point that every decision this council makes has a monetary cost. And this one was a cost that we should not have incurred. And I just hope that council can now work with the developer and get a good income for the community. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions on the report? I'll move item 5 then, the officer's information report. Is there a seconder? Councillor Graham. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you. Item 11, motions which notice been given are non-urgent business. Item 12, there's non-late items. Item 13, there are non-confidential business. There's none. Close the meeting at 6:40. 6:48.
6:48.
And thank you for attendance. That's a record.
Better than the last one. Oh, sorry.